Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Hey, always a delight to do this to kick off a show. We've got 3 new affiliates to welcome to the Conspiracy Show. Let's start with KVSF. That's 101.5 FM in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And WEKY, 1340 AM in Richmond, Kentucky. And one more from the Bluegrass State, WIRV, 1550 AM in Irvine, Kentucky. So to Santa Fe, Richmond, Kentucky, Irvine, Kentucky, Santa Fe, New Mexico, that is. Welcome, one and all. Great to be part of your lineup. And we look forward to adding more and more to the growing family here at the Conspiracy Show. You know, I'm looking outside here, and the fog has been rolling in. It reminds me of that 1980s John Carpenter film. I don't know if you ever saw The Fog with Adrienne Barbeau and Jamie Lee Curtis and John Houseman. It's very, if you get a chance to rent it, it's a rental, believe me. Not that you're going to see it in the big screen anymore. I paid, back in the day, Tim, they had something called $2 Tuesdays, when they were trying to get people to come to the theater in the during the week. So $2 Tuesdays, and that was one of the films that I saw on $2 Tuesdays, The Fog, and it was worth every dollar. It's a great premise, though. This former leper colony becomes shrouded in this, killer fog, and then all of a sudden, these zombie-like ghosts, who were, I think they were ghosts of pirates, descend on this leper colony to seek out their revenge for some reason. I don't know. All I remember was Adrienne Barbeau, of course, who used to be in that show Maude. She was Maude's daughter, Beatrice Arthur's daughter. Wonderful looking lady. And she played this all-night DJ in this little New England town. So, here I am sitting in a theater, or in a radio studio, and the fog is rolling in. Not that I'm Adrienne Barbeau, but I'm just saying I'm getting a little nervous. Strange things going on, of course, everywhere. And right here on this show sometimes. And for decades, there have been persistent rumors, tales, legends that government agencies all around the world have been secretly collecting and studying data on bizarre beasts, amazing animals, and strange creatures. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, sea serpents, get this, psychic pets, the chupacabra, the abominable snowman, have all attracted official classified interest. And now for the first time, the full fearsome facts are finally revealed in our good friend Nick Redfern's Monster Files. Always a delight to have Nick with us on the program. He's the author of many books, including The Pyramids and the Pentagon, The Real Men in Black, The NASA Conspiracies, Keep Out, Contactees, Memoirs of a Monster Hunter, and the World's Weirdest Places. He's appeared on more than 70 television shows, including Fox News, BBC's Out of This World, History Channel's Monster Quest, America's Book of Secrets, Ancient Aliens, and UFO Hunters. He writes regularly for UFO magazine, Mysterious Universe, and Fate, and he joins us from the great state of Texas. Nick Redfern, how are you?
Hey, Richard. I'm doing good, thanks. How's things?
Terrific, thank you.
Good.
I was joking with, not joking, but mentioning to George Ginescu, who is the host of the program that precedes mine, how you join me on the program and you're writing must be 2-3 books a year, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you're originally from England and you find yourself in the middle of Texas. You've been there now for a number of years, but do you ever get over that culture shock? I imagine it must be a huge culture shock.
Well, I wouldn't say it's so much a shock. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of differences. But I've been here 12 years now, and, I live just on the outskirts of Dallas, so it's not like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. I sort of grew up only about 5 or 6 miles from the English city of Birmingham, which is, a huge city. So, and I just traded one city for another, basically. So, in that sense, there are some differences, and some similarities, So, but I get back home quite a bit, so it's not like, that much of a culture shock where I'm just sort of thrust from one to the other. I sort of, go back and catch up with friends on the gossip and whatever's going on. So.
Well, Texas obviously has its fair share of, bizarre stories. So there's obviously a lot. It's a rich mind or a rich vein to be mined there for you. But congratulations on Monster Files.
Oh, well, thanks.
One of the things that jumped out at me immediately was, on this program over the years, I've had pet psychics on the program. But I've never even thought about psychic pets. What, pray tell, is a psychic pet, and why is, the government interested in psychic pets?
Well, this is a story that goes back to the early 1950s, specifically 1952, and the chapter in the book is actually based on official files which have now surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act, and they relate to a small U.S. Army program, little project that was initiated in 52 to try and determine if pets like dogs and cats possessed ESP. And the whole point was it was primarily focused upon dogs, but as I said, he did look at cats and even pigeons for some strange reason. But they primarily looked at pet dogs. And the idea was to try and see if there was any evidence that dogs possessed ESP, because they wanted to try and train them to use their psychic powers, if they did, to try and find landmines on battlefields. And it sounds a bizarre concept until you sort of realize, these are official documents, and they talk about how they sort of befriended. They don't actually say how, but they got the assistance of somebody who owned two German Shepherd dogs. One was called Binny, and the other one was called Tessie. And some of the aspects of the files are still blacked out, and so they don't exactly explain how they determined the dogs had psychic powers, but evidently the military was satisfied. And they launched a number of operations where the dogs would be sent out to areas of West Coast Beach along the coast of California. And the military would bury dummy landmines all around the beach, and in some cases actually out at sea, like about 30 or 40 feet out at sea, and about 10 feet down. And the dogs would go out, and apparently sort of about 70 or 80% of the time they would find them. And they actually ruled out that the dogs are using sort of their, a powerful sense of smell to find the mines, and actually concluded that they were done by psychic powers. The program was actually cancelled after about a year, unfortunately, because although the military concluded the project and the powers worked, they also conceded that the dogs couldn't control their ability every time. It was sort of hit and miss. But when it worked really well, and when it didn't, they just couldn't do anything about it. And so they decided to go back to sort of the more conventional ways of spying on the enemy, etc. But it's kind of like an early precursor to the remote viewing programs of the 70s and 80s.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, a lot of parallels there.
Human subjects, but this was 30, 40 years before that, just the turn of the 50s, but actually using dogs instead of people.
Well, of course, now we know that dogs can be used by people who suffer from seizures, epileptic seizures. Yep. Dogs can actually predict when the seizure is coming on. They can detect breast cancer. Now, whether that's intuitive or whether, again, that can be attributed to an incredible sense of smell, whether we're putting, someone who has an epileptic seizure puts out some sort of a hormone. Yeah. Hard to say, but I think all of us who've ever had a pet can attest to the fact that they are incredibly intuitive.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt that, in ways that are different to us, their skills are far great. Their sense of smell, is incredibly stronger. They hear different levels of, different pitches in terms of hearing, etc. So in those respects, that animals may not have the intelligence level we have, but a lot of them have skills that we don't. You take a spider, there's no way a human being could ever spin a spider's web. It's incredibly intricate, but we could never do it, but a spider can. So.
Well, I'm curious to know how you got a hold of these documents. Are they widely available? Did you have to put in a Freedom of Information Act request?
Yeah.
And
that's primarily what happened. Was it's like, I suppose, any aspect of investigative journalism is that, if you get a snippet of a story or, for example, some of the cases in the book, what happened was that I came across a reference in a file, perhaps that had already been declassified, that referenced another one. A good example is the British government's files on the Loch Ness Monster. There's an internal reference in one of the documents to an old sea serpent file put together by the British Navy, the Royal Navy, back in the 1800s. And so I then went searching, fishing, if you like, for that file, and that opened doors to internal references to other files. So it's kind of like that once you sort of get hold of one file, a lot of people don't realize, that the document itself may reference other documents, and then, it's a case of applying for them. So it's pretty much like, you'd investigate. I work also as a journalist and author, but, if I was writing a feature for a newspaper on a murder or, a bank robbery, you'd follow the same sort of investigative techniques and just try and put the bigger picture together, and that's what chiefly opened the doors to these files.
Nick Redfern is with us, the author of Monster Files, a look inside government secrets and classified documents on bizarre creatures and extraordinary animals. Well, you mentioned the Loch Ness Monster. Tell us or give us a peek inside this document. I mean, was it just a passing reference? Do they have... I mean, it seems like military organizations or intelligence groups will study just about anything if they think it's of interest to the public. It may be more of a sociological type of project for them. But what interest did the military in Britain have with the Loch Ness Monster?
Well, this actually goes back to the mid-1960s and an organisation called JARIC. And JARIC stands for Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre. And this is an arm of the British military that, say, for example, there were rumours that, at the height of the Cold War, the Soviets were building a new missile base or something like that, and they would send high-flying spy planes over to take pictures. Well, the guys at JARIC were the people who would analyse the pictures. In other words, they were sort of the elite of the British military when it comes to analysing spy photographs and determining what the pictures show. Do they show missiles? Do they show evidence of hangars being built? That kind of thing. And in the mid-60s, there was a group within JARIC that got interested in the Loch Ness Monster, and they acquired copies, and in some cases the originals, of film footage and photographs purporting to show strange creatures in Loch Ness, and they actually spent a lot of time.
Let me just jump in here, Nick. Sorry to jump in and interrupt, but we'll take a time out. We'll come back and we'll discuss the Loch Ness Monster when we return. Monster Files with Nick Redfern here on The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
The truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
And if you've ever wondered whether the Pentagon has the body of a Bigfoot on ice, or what the U.S. military is hiding from us about lake monsters, or what the link is between the CIA and the abominable snowman, you've come to the right place. Nick Redfern has researched this extensively, and it's all to be found in his new book, Monster Files, a look inside government secrets and classified documents on bizarre creatures and extraordinary animals. And Nick, before the break, we were talking about the British military and the Loch Ness Monster, and they had obtained some footage of the Loch Ness Monster back in the 1960s. So I guess the question is, why were they interested in it, and what exactly did they conclude?
Well, it actually stemmed, Richard, from a guy in the British Parliament, in the British government, who'd served in the military during the Second World War, and he developed an interest in the issue of the Loch Ness Monster, and actually approached friends and colleagues in JARIC, this organisation that analysed film footage, and said, I'm interested, and would you be interested in sort of setting up a little programme to look into it? And they actually said, yes, we will. It kind of sounded like an interesting diversion for them. And this wasn't sort of like an outside of hours thing, like a little off-the-record thing. It was part of their official job. And the people at JARIC were sent various pieces of film footage and photographs that had been shared, within the UFO, within the Loch Ness Monster research arena, if you like. And because they had the tools and the technology to analyse film footage and blow it up and make the pictures clearer, etc., in somewhere like 7 or 8 pieces of footage and photographs, they were able to rule out, for example, things like wave formations, small boats, that kind of thing, and actually concluded that the pictures showed, or the film showed, creatures that seemed to be under intelligent control, anywhere from about 12 to 15 feet long, and that seemed to be partly out of the water, but with significant portions of the body under the water and leaving wakes that seemed to be evidence of a living animal rather than, as I said, like a small boat. Now, when you consider the caliber of the people doing the analysis, as I said, the elite of the British military's photo analysts, then it really sort of makes you realize that, when you've got people of that caliber investigating things and coming to those conclusions, it sort of really does add weight to the credibility of the mystery, if you like.
And it also causes one to wonder, what else do they have locked in those files that we don't know about that they won't release?
There's actually a file, or files I should say, from the 1980s and the 1990s on the Loch Ness Monster. We know all of those haven't yet been released. One of them was related to a project that was actually cancelled before it began. It was seen as being too sort of unfeasible. But the idea was the British government under when Margaret Thatcher was in power, was basically to try and train dolphins to swim in Loch Ness and look for the creatures, if you like. And the plan was to have them fitted with sonar equipment and cameras that could be automatically, remote censored to take pictures, etc., in the event they came across anything. But reading the file, it doesn't look like there's much thought was given to the idea, well, what happened if the dolphins and the Loch Ness monsters confronted each other? It might not come off the best for the dolphins. And so the program was sort of quietly shut down. But it was intriguing that, the government of the day spent quite a bit of money sort of researching how to get the dolphins, and how to strap them with all this equipment and train them in Loch Ness. And it was all done under the cloak of secrecy throughout the 1980s.
I wish the intelligence groups of the military would leave the poor dolphins alone. First of all, of course, in the early 1960s, we had Operation Mongoose, where they were going to try and train dolphins to assassinate Castro when he went for his morning dip in the Atlantic or the Caribbean or whatever it was. And now they want dolphins to track down the Loch Ness Monster. And of course, we just had we have this new theory about the Loch Ness Monster that's just surfaced, pardon the pun, that Nessie is just essentially bubbles produced by some seismic activity on the floor of Loch Ness. What do you make of that?
Not much. I think there's absolutely no doubt that there are a lot of cases regarding Loch Ness Monster can be explained as things like sort of freak waves, where the waves sort of roll and it looks like something snaking along the water. You also get trees, that decay, rot, and fall into Loch Ness, and then as the vegetation rots and, the gas gets leaked, etc., they do sometimes float to the surface. And so, you can see like an 8-foot-long tree trunk. So things like that do happen, and occasionally you get seals in Loch Ness, which, okay, they're much smaller, but at a distance, you might think something like that was a Loch Ness Monster. However, when you get credible people talking about seeing like a hump and a large neck sticking anywhere from sort of 2 to 5 feet out of the water, and the neck is associated with the hump as well, then it's very difficult to sort of reconcile that with just bubbles, you know what I mean? That's clearly a sighting of something solid and tangible, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree with you. I was mentioning, and it's on the back of the book, cribbing from the back of the book. Does the Pentagon have the body of Bigfoot on ice? It's a very provocative question. So let me ask you. I mean, when you dug into this, what does the U.S. government know about Bigfoot, and do they, in fact, you suspect, have a body on ice?
Well, they may well have. This story goes back to 1980, May 1980, when in Washington State, the Mount St. Helens, which had been sort of rumbling and bubbling with volcanic activity for a while, suddenly catastrophically exploded. There was this huge volcanic eruption that literally blew away part of the mountain, and it sent ash and dust and dirt and debris literally thousands of feet into the air above Mount St. Helens, and actually killed somewhere in the region of about 60 people who refused to leave their homes and didn't sort of heed the warnings as to what was going to happen. And of course, anybody who lived through that period will probably remember the whole Mount St. Helens disaster. But in addition to the people who were killed, the wildlife records suggest there was somewhere in the region of about 1,000 elk were killed, and tens of thousands of smaller animals as well. And, of course, there were a lot of emergency services and the military in there lending hand and assistance, to help the people and even the animals, that have been injured, etc. And since literally almost in just a couple of months after Mount St. Helens occurred and right through to the present day, we have reports from probably about 9 or 10 retired military personnel who said that they were in the area at the time helping these sort of emergency procedures when they either saw or were told by colleagues of these large double-rotor military helicopters coming in with these very powerful nets and airlifting these dead bodies of what were described as like gigantic hairy apes or like giant hairy humanoid creatures out of the area. And, you know, the rumour is from there that they were taken to military bases for secret autopsies. Now, this is one of the cases in the book, as I point out, where we don't have the documents, we just have the testimony, which doesn't necessarily mean, you know, it's not credible. You know, there are a lot of good cases on record where, you know, the witness testimony is the most important thing of all. And I think it's intriguing that, you know, we get different soldiers and different military personnel giving their own opinion, but from their own perspective as well. You know, if everybody was saying exactly the same thing from the same angle, etc., that would be a bit suspicious. But it makes more sense and adds to credibility when somebody knows about the area where it occurred, somebody else knows something of the autopsy, somebody else talks about where the bodies were taken, which is what you would expect, you know, if they were involved in from the perspective of different units, etc. But it basically comes down to the military reportedly finding somewhere in the region of perhaps 5 or 6 bodies, and incredibly, maybe a couple of injured ones that survived, and airlifting them out and trying to figure out what they were. But the big question is, you know, why would that be hidden? You know, why hide the fact that North America has a giant ape? Well, one of the other things I point out in the book is that this gets in really controversial areas, but there are a lot of cases on record where Bigfoot has actually been seen in the same time and location as UFO activity.
Exactly, yes.
Rise to the idea that could Bigfoot be something connected with that, or a paranormal creature, and that might explain the secrecy. You know, if it was just a giant ape, it would be a zoological discovery. You know, it wouldn't be something for the Pentagon to hide. But maybe if, you know, you have these weird UFO overtones to the mystery of Bigfoot, that might be a reason on its own, you know.
This is a fascinating chapter. I mean, this is almost, this one incident with all of these military eyewitnesses is almost worthy of a full-length, you know, treatment all on its own, don't you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, if more information came through, I mean, granted, it probably could be. I mean, what I've done in that chapter pretty much amounts to, albeit in summary form, it amounts to all the information we have so far. But yeah, I mean, there's, you know, it's one of these cases, like many, where it starts off with just a few snippets and a couple of witnesses, and then somebody goes digging into it, and they find more and more. You know, I think ideally it would probably be more suited to somebody who actually lives in that area, you know, and who can chase down every lead. I think that would be the ideal way to do it. But, you know, it's like Roswell. That started off with just like 1 or 2 people who spoke out, and then eventually, it amounted to hundreds. So it wouldn't be impossible, you know, that if somebody really wanted to get on the tail of this story and, you know, the Mount St. Helens Bigfoot autopsies, etc., that, you know, they might open a huge can of worms.
Well, there's your assignment, Nick. Go to it. As if you're not busy enough. But, to me, that is a story that definitely needs to be fleshed out. I got to ask you about this, and that is this U.S. Army Major Edward Lansdale, the brains behind a monstrous vampire. We're going to come up on a break in about 5 minutes, but let's get this story started anyway.
All right. Well, Lansdale was in the 1950s and 60s. He was sort of brilliant officer, if you like, or strategist in the field of psychological warfare. That's basically sort of trying to defeat the enemy by very alternative means that don't always or ever, you know, involve like guns, bombs, bullets, whatever. It's essentially trying to play with the mind of the enemy to try and confuse them and manipulate them. And Lansdale worked on a number of programs which involved the spreading and sort of creation or re-emerging of myths and folklore to try and frighten particularly superstitious enemy nations and troops. And the one particular case that I talk about in the book, this involved an operation that Lansdale was involved in the Philippines in the early 1950s. And there was an uprising by what were called the Huk rebels, which is H-U-K. And the Philippine government asked America, you know, can you help us defeat these rebels? And, you know, the American government said, yes, you will be happy to. And as well as sending military personnel in, they sent Lansdale in. He actually became quite good friends with high-ranking people in the Philippine government and military. And he said, well, do the Hook rebels have any particular superstitions that we can sort of work on and perhaps exploit them that way? And they said, well, yes, they have a great fear of this creature known as the Aswang vampire, which is ASWANG. And it was supposedly like a terrible, terrifying, blood-sucking creature or creatures that lived in the forests of the Philippines. And so Edward Lansdale had a brilliant idea to try and bring the Aswang vampire to life, and he did it in a very, very strange and alternative fashion. And the fashion was that, regardless of whether there were any realities behind these rumors and myths of this blood-sucking creature, Lansdale came up with this sort of fascinating idea to create this device which would sort of mimic the mark of a vampire. It would shoot these two powerful, sharp prongs into the neck of a person, which would give the image of like the classic vampire fangs and the bite, etc. And so they had this device specifically crafted by military intelligence, and they sent like a Delta Force team out into the forests to find the nearest Huck rebel camp. And late at night, after the sun had set, they grabbed the nearest Huck rebel and pulled him out into the woods, killed him, and jabbed him in the neck with this device. Then they hung his body up from a tree by his ankles and drained the blood out of the neck wound, which is like a large and, gaping wound. And then, while it was still under the cover of darkness, the next morning, and before the morning, I should say, they took the body back to the camp, knowing it would be found by his friends and colleagues. And, of course, it struck fear into them. Their colleague, drained of blood, looking pale, with these wounds on his neck. And they fled the area. And, of course, the area they fled was key strategic ground that the Philippine government wanted back, and they got it back. And they kept doing this time and time again, pushing back the Huck rebels by spreading more and more of these sort of fake vampire killings, etc.
That is a fascinating... That's a long way to go. However, it proved very effective, and one has to also wonder then if the military has used... This is, obviously not a part of what you're talking about in this book, but the whole UFO phenomenon. Many people have theorized that the military is doing exactly the same thing with UFOs, using it as a cover story.
Yeah.
However, when we come back, I want to talk about the big cats in the UK and how this controversy actually goes right to the heart of the royal family. Nick Redfern, author of Monster Files, a look inside government secrets and classified documents on bizarre creatures and extraordinary animals. Stay with us.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Nick Redfern stays with us, the author of Monster Files. Let me just crib here from one of the chapters, The ABCs of a Royal Conspiracy. In the late 1980s, English monster hunter Jonathan Downes became personally embroiled in a controversy that began with the investigation of a mysterious large cat or cats on the loose in Britain, and which ultimately extended into the heart of the British monarchy, military, and government, and the domain of deep and dark official secrecy. Of course, Nick, in the UK, they have this phenomenon called alien big cats, or ABCs. And, of course, Britain is not home to an indigenous population of a large cat, panthers or cougars or jaguars or tigers or what have you. And yet, hundreds of witnesses claim that they have seen these big animals. Now, first of all, what does this alien big cat story have to do with the royal family?
Well, that's a good question. It's a sort of a strange story. But John Downes, who you just mentioned, is a good friend of mine. John runs a group, a full-time group called the Centre for Fortean Zoology, named after Charles Fort, an early 20th century investigator of strange phenomena. And you're right that every year in Britain we get hundreds of reports of these so-called alien big cats. And other than house cats in Britain, pet cats, there shouldn't be anything roaming around, like a mountain lion or anything like that at all, or a black leopard, but people see them. The only wildcat in Britain is called the Scottish wildcat, but even that is barely any bigger than a normal house cat. You wouldn't even look twice at it. It's quite fierce, but it's not, of any size at all. So it's sort of a bit of a conundrum that people see these things, and some people think they're sort of third and second or third generation escapees from private zoos, which may be the case in some of them, some of the reports, and others, which don't know where they're from, but people see enough of them every year, and even, the police report them as well. So there's clearly a phenomenon. Now, in the late 1980s, John got a call from a former British Army intelligence operative who'd been involved in an operation in the mid-1980s to shadow and follow Princess Diana. And this goes back to around about 1984, 1985, when apparently the British government heard rumours that terrorists were planning on either kidnapping or assassinating Princess Diana. So what they did, they set up like a small military intelligence unit to watch her carefully everywhere she went. And Diana herself apparently didn't know anything about this, sort of just shadowing her every movement. And this, it gets into controversial areas because, as is known today but wasn't known then, but this was revealed to John, that this all relates to when Diana and Charles's marriage was sort of on the rocks, and, she'd been seeing a few other people. And the military knew about this because they'd been watching her. So, it was a case where they didn't say anything. So they kept quiet about that, and just referenced it presumably in internal files that, Diana had been to this sort of clandestine meeting with one of her boyfriends. And they followed on one occasion to the wilds of Dartmoor in Devonshire, England, which looks straight out of, The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is actually where The Hound of the Baskervilles is set. And on one occasion, when they were watching the property where Diana was staying, through night scope equipment, with rifles, etc., just keeping a lookout for terrorists, etc., they saw this huge black cat prowling around the grounds of the property. And they described, the guy who spoke to John described it as like a huge body, like about 6 feet long, very muscular, thick neck, and a long, powerful tail. It looked just like a huge black jaguar, something like that. And the military, of course, was in a total quandary. They didn't know whether to shoot it and then risk giving away why they were there. And if that came out and the media got hold of it, number one, the media would have realized that Diana was being watched and this whole terrorist story would have come out. Number two, it would have revealed to the media that, Diana was seeing somebody behind Charles's back, and that would have come tumbling out. So this unit decided the best thing to do was to do nothing and say nothing and just hope that the cat went on its way. This was like 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. And it actually did. It sort of prowled around, presumably, looking for small animals to eat, and then wandered off, into the foggy moors and was not seen again. But John got this story, the whole thing, in 1989, and this was long before Diana herself, confessed to that, yes, she had, boyfriends on the side, etc. So that in itself actually added credibility to the story. But it was sort of a fascinating one because it had so many twists and turns, going from Diana's private life to military intelligence shadowing her, and a national security issue with her possibly being, an attempted kidnapping or something like that.
Indeed, and it's fascinating, despite the fact that we've had hundreds and hundreds of eyewitness sightings of these big cats, alien big cats in the UK. It's not until someone in the military comes forward or some document is released that we give greater credence to it. However, I feel, at this point there's not much doubt that there are
there's not.
These huge jungle cats roaming England. How they got there, that's the mystery. Nick Redfern stays with us, the author of Monster Files, here on The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Serrett.
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet.
Nick Redfern stays with us for just a few moments yet. Just a reminder that starting next week, I will be broadcasting from the Elite Hotel in Kalamata, Greece. That's located in southern Greece, in Messenia. If you look at a map and you see at the bottom of Greece those sort of 5 fingers sticking out like a hand, those fingers, that's Messenia, beautiful part of Greece, and that, of course, is the mighty Aphrodite's ancestral homeland. So I will be there, as I say, broadcasting live for the next 5 weeks. Rosemary Ellen Guiley will be with us, media scientist Nelson Thal talking about the lunar landing hoax. The Liberty Man, John Moore, will be along to talk about Planet X. Jim Elvidge from The Universe Solved, with some fascinating stories about our mysterious universe, and much more. Oh, Ron Patton from Paranoia Magazine. So be sure to tune in, and we'll be actually leaving tomorrow with the twin boys, and can't wait to get there. The land of the olive, and the birthplace of democracy and philosophy, and Herodotus, Socrates, Plato's, just so much. Everywhere you step, it's just history everywhere. All right, Nick Redfern, I got to ask you about this strange character, Frank Hansen, who claimed that he was in possession of a primitive humanoid that I guess that was preserved in a block of ice that he plucked out of the water around the coast of Siberia. Tell me about this story, Nick.
Yeah, this goes back to the mid-1960s, a controversial story concerning something that became known as the Minnesota Iceman. And Frank Hansen actually lived in Minnesota, and he was someone who put on like a lot of entertaining displays at state fairs, not sort of like, the old style so-called freak shows, but, there'll be things like two-headed snakes on display and that sort of thing, and is it real or is it fake, that kind of thing. And in the mid-1960s, Hansen started showing this thing that became known as the Minnesota Iceman, and it looked just like a large humanoid hair-covered creature encased in a block of ice. And there were various theories as to what it was and where it came from. One was that it was actually shot somewhere in the forests of Minnesota. Another theory, an interesting one, was that it was actually killed in the jungles of Vietnam during the Vietnam War and smuggled back in a body bag and supposedly transferred to a rich millionaire that Hansen was in touch with, who eventually allowed Hansen to put it on display briefly. And in the mid-60s, it was actually seen by a couple of well-respected cryptozoologists. Bernard Hoovelmans was one of them. He's a very well-respected cryptozoologist. And he essentially said that when he examined it, he could actually sort of smell the stench of rotten meat coming through the ice, which if it was a model, that would be sort of a very sophisticated technique. But he said it looked very real. It looked like some sort of hair-covered primitive humanoid creature. And it was put on display for years. And eventually, or ultimately, I should say, the real one, if you like, was supposedly transferred back to the millionaire, and then, the model, a model equivalent of it was put on display instead. And, of course, there are people who said that there was only ever a model. But you can actually see the model version now. It's on display at a place called the Museum of the Weird in Austin, Texas, and you can go down there and sort of see it's still encased in ice to this day. So we're not sure what it was. But what we know, the reason I mention this in the book, is because when rumours started floating around that it was a primitive humanoid and that it was shot and killed, you had all bureaucracy started asking questions. Well, does that mean there was a murder involved? Even if it was a primitive human, it was still a human. And actually, the FBI got involved and opened a small file on it and actually sent one of their agents out to visit Frank Hansen, which kind of, I guess sort of scared him, basically. That's the best way to describe it. In his own words, he was sort of very worried when he found out the FBI was asking questions about him and the Minnesota Iceman. And eventually an agent went round and looked at it and through the ice and said, well, it doesn't look human. It's not part of our jurisdiction if it's just, a hairy, oddball creature. And they satisfied him and just left. And I think Frank Hansen basically sort of breathed a deep sigh of relief at the fact that, he was sort of left alone. But it was one of these sort of bizarre and surreal episodes where a sort of a circus freak creature encased in ice actually attracts the attention of the FBI.
Certain locations seem to attract a strangeness, and West Virginia is one of those places. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, a regular visitor to the program, has written an entire book just about the strange creatures that come out of West Virginia. We're all, of course, familiar with the Mothman, and down in Point Pleasant, rather. They have their annual Mothman convention. And, of course, it was celebrated in a famous, the book and the movie, The Mothman Prophecies. But something else strange going on in West Virginia. I guess closing in on about 30 years ago, this all sort of kicked off with the discovery of a couple of German shepherds the mutilated corpses found completely drained of blood. And this wasn't the Mothman people were seeing. What was it?
Well, yeah, this is a creature that a lot of people described as similar to Mothman. Many people don't realize that creatures like Mothman have been reported all around the world, and you can find them throughout culture and mythology and folklore, dating back thousands of years. If you look at things, for example, like harpies and gargoyles, they actually have very deep similarities with some of the creatures that people see today, like the Mothman. But the one you're talking about, this was a creature very much like Mothman, and probably with hindsight, more like the so-called creature in the Jeepers Creepers movies, if you've ever seen any of those. Sort of like a large humanoid, but with these bat-like wings that sort of showed membranes and like a leathery type appearance. And the story was that the attacks had actually occurred near a government facility where a number of dogs had been killed, and people had seen this creature sort of rather ironically on what was always like a dark and stormy night, when the wind was blowing and the clouds were full and, just sort of like a thunderous evening. And they would see this creature sort of hovering around the facility, or in one case actually sort of prowling around on the roof of it, and then it sort of just soared off into the sky, just like some sort of, 1500s gargoyle or something along those lines. And again, reportedly, when these animals attacks occurred, and the fact that the sightings occurred in the direct vicinity of a government facility, an investigation was undertaken by the authorities, and all the eyewitnesses who worked there were interviewed and asked to prepare like a summary report. And the upshot of it was that, it just baffled the security people and everybody involved, that the fact that they didn't really know what to do with it other than collate the reports and try and make some sense of it. But, when you're dealing with sightings of a large winged humanoid monster in the vicinity of a government facility, there's really not much sense you can make of it. And the sightings, like with Mothman in Point Pleasant, they actually just came to a grinding halt, and whatever the creature was, it left. But apparently there was something like a 20 or 30 page file put together that contained all the various reports from the government eyewitnesses.
Didn't a similar creature, though, end up in your parts in Houston?
Yeah, there's again, what I talk about in the book, sort of deep similarities to this. It became known as the Houston Batman. And this actually predates Mothman by about 15 years. It was seen in Houston in the early 50s. And the description is very similar. It's like a large humanoid with glowing eyes that would sort of prowl in the woods, and it was occasionally seen perched on trees. And people still report this to this day, this sort of giant humanoid creature that they occasionally report seeing, against a backdrop of like a full moon, where it suddenly appears, when it's lit up by the moon. So, there's a lot of these things all over the planet, and not just Point Pleasant.
Well, after researching for the book, Nick, what was your takeaway? I mean, a great line here on the back is, despite what your parents might have told you when you were a child, monsters, creepy creatures, and terrifying beasts really do exist, and our governments know all about them. I mean, is that the takeaway? Is that true?
Yes. I mean, cryptozoology, Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, chupacabra, lake monsters, there's enough credible witness testimony, in my view, to suggest these creatures, animals, however you want to term them, are real. And the very fact that many of the cases I refer to in the book come via official freedom of information documentation that's surfaced, then that adds further credence. And, I think what we're actually seeing is the tip of the iceberg. There's lots been written on Bigfoot over the years. Very little's been written on what the government knows about it. So, I think even I'll admit to having, as someone who's written a book on it, we're still in the early stages of research into this field, but I think it's going to be sort of like a fertile one for, far deeper research as well in the future.
Well, that's good news for Nick Redfern and for all of us who enjoy your books. What's up next, Nick? What are you working on now?
I'm working on a couple of UFO ones. I'm doing one Men in Black book. I've done a couple of Men in Black books, but I'm working on another because I get so many reports. And the other one is like a study of UFO cases where the files have suspiciously vanished. You know, it's like the exact opposite of freedom of information where we've got the files. This is where files, we know they existed or should have existed, and they've vanished. You know, we just don't know where they are.
Were you able to cover any of the citizen hearing on UFO disclosure?
No, I wasn't, unfortunately. No, I wasn't at that. So, you know, I just sort of read it all online like everybody else. So.
Well, I mean, what is your sense in terms of, you know, the momentum that the disclosure movement seems to be gathering? Do you get a sense that they're making any progress, that maybe the government in the United States will disclose at some point?
Well, you know, I think in terms of the idea in general, it's a great one, and there's no doubt there's a lot of enthusiasm behind it, and that's a very good thing. You know, without enthusiasm, without pushing, we're not going to get anywhere. The only downside, as I see it, is that I'm not convinced that, you know, it's the government per se that's actually hiding the truth. You know, everybody points a finger at the government and says, oh, they're the bad guys. I actually don't think when it comes to the UFO subject that is the case. I think the real deep secrets are hidden by, you know, almost like a secret government within government, if you see what I mean, rather than the elected authorities being the people who are hiding it. So, you know, I think knocking on the door of the White House or Buckingham Palace or wherever, you know, certainly gets publicity, and it may open some doors, but I think that really deep secrets aren't held by these agencies. They're held by these sort of black box type groups, you know, and there's a black box within a black box, that kind of thing. And I think these people, they're not going to give up the secrets until they're ready to, no matter how many people go hammering on the door, unfortunately. But in saying that, you know, any exposure and publicity is good. And, you know, the disclosure movement is demonstrating that, and also by the fact, you know, there are a lot of credible military and government people testifying too.
You know, it's really a shame that you weren't called to testify, Nick, because I don't know of anyone out there who's written it so extensively or who has dedicated so much of his time and research into the whole, you know, Men in Black phenomenon. Just in the minute that we have left, do you think that whether or not the whole UFO file has gone, you know, into private hands, you know, the research and development wing of various, you know.
Yeah, I actually do think. I think it's gone partly into private enterprises, and also sort of black projects. You know, there's like these so-called black projects that aren't answerable to Congress, and Congress doesn't even necessarily know they exist. You know, and they're buried so deep that even the elected government isn't necessarily aware of them, and I think it's there where the secrets are found. But of course, that is an incredibly difficult world to look into, because, you know, how can you look into a project when you don't even know it officially exists? That's the problem I think we're facing, you know. Exactly.
Well, Nick, listen, look forward to your next book, as always, and congratulations once again on Monster Files.
All right, thanks a lot, Richard.
Always appreciate it. Nick Redfern. The Conspiracy Show, your portal into the program, our website, www.richardsyrett.com, and say hello on Twitter, @RichardSyrett.
Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Welcome. I just wanted to welcome once again 3 new affiliates to the Conspiracy Show family. KVSF 101.5 FM in Santa Fe, New Mexico, WEKY 1340 AM in Richmond, Kentucky, and WIRV 1550 AM Irvine, Kentucky. So welcome. And we're always delighted when we add new affiliates to the Conspiracy Show. So I've been talking with various members of the disclosure movement in the wake of the citizen hearing on UFO and ET disclosure, which happened in Washington, D.C., the end of April. Of course, Stephen Bassett, one of the heavyweights in that field, But there's another heavyweight also in this field. And I had the pleasure of meeting him several years ago when I was down in Washington, D.C. And he was, or is really responsible for, in large measure, the disclosure movement in convincing major witnesses, major military people to come forward and go on the record about UFOs. And that, of course, is Dr. Stephen Greer, who is, I must say, a very imposing figure, rather intimidating. He does not suffer fools lightly. I remember we arrived at his apartment in Washington, D.C., and we were about maybe 5 or 6 minutes late, and he was not impressed. He said, you know, I was an emergency room doctor. 5 or 6 minutes could be the difference between life and death. And I thought, wow, point taken, Dr. Greer. Now, however, he is really the subject of a brand new feature-length documentary film called Sirius, which follows Dr. Stephen Greer, as I say, an emergency room doctor turned UFO researcher, as he struggles to disclose top-secret information about classified energy and propulsion techniques. Sirius deals not only with the subject of UFO and ET visitation disclosure, but also with the advanced, clean, and alternate energy technology that's getting them here. Sirius goes into eye-opening detail regarding how the disclosure of such technology, some of which have been suppressed for decades, can enable humanity to leave the age of the polluting petrodollar, transform society, and improve mankind's chances for their survival. The film includes numerous government and military witnesses to UFO and ET secrecy. It also explains the connection to free energy and provides not only the vision of contact with ET civilizations, as regularly witnessed by the CE5 contact teams featured therein, but also the paradigm-shifting physical evidence of a medically and scientifically analyzed DNA-sequenced humanoid creature of unknown classification found in the Atacama Desert, Chile. Additionally, eye-opening are the credentials and pedigree of the science and medical team behind the potentially profound and historical announcement. Joining me to talk more about this feature-length documentary film, Sirius, is an Emmy-Award-winning film director, Amardeep Kalika, and the co-founder of ETLet'sTalk.org and also the founder of the CE5 Global Initiative, which is a term describing a fifth category of close encounters with extraterrestrial intelligence, characterized by mutual, bilateral communication rather than unilateral contact. Costa Macris. Welcome to the Conspiracy Show, Amardeep and Costa. How are you?
Thank you very much.
Hey.
Well, I'm just fine.
Thank you very much.
Amardeep, I understand that you like to be referred to as Arm. Can I call you Arm?
Absolutely. You can call me Arm.
Okay. And Costa, welcome to you as well. Let me start by asking you how you got involved in this film and how you came to know Dr. Stephen Greer.
We were doing a script for a studio, mini studio here. We wrote a script that had to do with extraterrestrials and this whole endeavor and exciting research that's coming out about it. And I picked up the phone and I said, Dr. Greer, could we meet? Because I really want to, at the end of the script, to send people to www.disclosureproject.com. He said, well, we could do better than that. I'm in L.A. Let's have a dinner meeting. So we sat at dinner, and immediately he understood where we were in terms of narrative film. And narrative means fictional, right? Documentary means the truth. And he goes, I go to him, we want to make this as close to the truth as possible. So if there's anything that we could talk about this, he was open. He was like, no, let's really talk about it. And then he started telling me about how he, as a yogi, flew 15 feet, and all these miraculous things happened to him, and he was abducted, for lack of a better word, by extraterrestrials, and they put back down to have a mission. And I was like, oh my God. This is an interesting character. He himself is such an interesting character, whether it be a lightning rod for good or bad, he's interesting. So I said to him, hey, what about a documentary on you and all of this situation that we're seeing and the whole community that is coming together? And that's where we hit it off. He was like, how do we do that? And I was like, there's a thing called crowdfunding. Lo and behold, we became the highest crowdfunded documentary to date. That that's amazing in its own right, because crowdfunding is changing the way people do business. It's the way the Encyclopedia Britannica was written. It was actually crowdsourced, not just with funding, but scientists levied and gave their articles to Encyclopedia Britannica. So that's how we met. That's how we got off the ground, and then we started going into research and stuff like that.
That was Arm Kalika. All right, let's get Costa Macris in here. Now, first of all, explain what the CE5 Global Initiative is all about, Costa.
Certainly. It's an inspiration that came from Dr. Greer's vision of citizen ambassadors who would learn the CE5 Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols that Dr. Greer had been lecturing about, writing about, and teaching to people by the hundreds and thousands all over the planet. And so the idea was that I could organize all these people from all over the world who were using these CE5 protocols in a coordinated monthly effort, usually on a Saturday nearest the new moon when we would have a dark sky, and try to build up a wave of more and more sightings through our efforts. So the Global CE5 Initiative began in October 2010. We started out with 40 teams at that time, spread over maybe about a dozen countries, and now we've actually grown through the auspices of ETLet'sTalk.org to more than 3,200 members all over the world, but comprising more than 50 countries. So our idea is to, at least once a month, get together over a 24-hour period, no matter where we are, in whatever location, and despite the fact we may never meet and know each other, still in the virtual kind of community, we approach the ET presence here on Earth, the many races that are visiting and helping, with our goodwill, with peaceful intentions, and with the intention to do bilateral communication, interactive communication, not just passive, because what CE5 really is about is a human-initiated contact with the ET intelligence, or as I like to call them, our star friends, and then an ongoing communication in many, many different ways. So this Global CE5 initiative is really on the vanguard of humans interacting with this ET presence in a very intelligent, very loving, and co-creative kind of way to see what we as ambassadors and what they as visitors can create together, how we can help each other, because we have the survival of the Earth both in common and of humanity and all the life forms here. The ETs have stated that they're very concerned about the many challenges and problems that have been created here, and I don't have to mention to your listeners, what those are, but they do include in the list, wars, environmental destruction, the fossil fuel problem that we have, et cetera, et cetera. So we have something in common, and the Global CE5 Initiative is bringing our teams together every month to talk with the ETs and communicate in whatever way is appropriate. And we consider that being something that has never been done on this scale before. We intend to grow to thousands of teams in all countries of the world, and we're on our way to doing that. And that's why we created ETLet'sTalk.org to coordinate this great citizens movement for doing this communication.
What form does this bilateral communication with these ET races present here on Earth take? I mean, how do you communicate with them?
We use what we call a consciousness-based approach. Anybody who's ever heard of an alpha state, where you can get into a very relaxed mode physically and mentally and emotionally, where you're, though you're relaxed, you're still aware of what's around you. Now, this is a kind of heightened kind of vibration, a frequency. The ET races that are visiting here can attune to that. They can find you and communicate with you at that level. Now, the communication, after it's initiated by the human, will often be responded to in many different ways by the ET presence. It doesn't have to just be a sighting in the sky, although that's very thrilling and exciting, and no matter how many times it happens to me and others, it always remains fresh, you understand? But the communication can come in other ways. The ETs rather can use telepathy for those of us who are able to communicate in that way. They can work through our lucid dreams. They can use electrical phenomenon. We often have radar detectors going off in the middle of places that are very remote where there's no signals. We have smartphones that turn on, and many, many other things like that get reported by our groups. So the communication comes in a very large variety of ways, and that is not just about the lights in the sky, as exciting as that is.
Costa Macris is with us, co-founder of ETLet'sTalk.org and the founder of the CE5 Global Initiative. In addition, Armadeep Kalika is with us, Emmy-Award-winning director, and two of the principals involved in the feature-length documentary Sirius, which follows the life of Dr. Stephen Greer, an emergency room doctor turned UFO researcher, as he struggles to disclose top-secret information about classified energy and propulsion techniques. We'll talk about that as well. And this fascinating story also contained in the film, and that is this humanoid creature of unknown classification that was discovered in a desert in Chile. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
The truth goes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Talking about the feature-length documentary film Sirius, about the life and work of Dr. Stephen Greer, who's no stranger to listeners of this program. But it's also about the disclosure of free energy technologies and advanced propulsion systems, and also the discovery of this humanoid creature found in the desert in Chile. It's almost three films in one, brought together nicely through the work of Emmy Award-winning director Arm Kalika, who was born in India, came to America because of religious persecution, and his father was tragically killed in a mass shooting at the Sikh temple in Wisconsin almost a year ago now. And so, Arm, you've really taken active advocacy role in championing for peace as a result of that, and you consider this film, Sirius, a tool in bringing people together. How so?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of my job is to uncover truth as a documentarian and spread it, or at least try to get closer to what is true and what is not true. In the situation with my father, where we were religiously persecuted in India, and then we have a white extremist who came into our temple and attacked it and killed 6 people. Everybody in this, that knew that we were making the film cried, well, this is a government conspiracy. This is a government conspiracy. And I had to stop everybody that was around me that was saying that, because I said, look, and there wasn't that many. There was only a couple of people around me who knew the whole information. So could this possibly be? And of course, I had to stop everybody and say, no, it cannot be, because it doesn't match reason. It doesn't match logic. It doesn't match the map that is already set up. You give a good summary of the film, and one of the themes that we have to deal with in the film is free energy, and the idea of technological advancement to the point that we can become a peaceful society. And that everybody asked me about. They're like, did you guys find devices? And we did find some devices. And of course, we were dismayed or swayed away from other devices for political reasons, which almost always had to do with capitalism, and had nothing to do with government conspiracy. It had to do with the idea, well, in our case, I'm not going to say that all over the world, patents are not suppressed. I think that they are suppressed. I'm not going to say that there is a secret hand that sits aside certain leadership positions in our government, and the only reason we call them a secret society is because they themselves don't want to be known. And so they must be just labeled a secret society. And there are those groups of people that create assassination attempts, coup d'etats, and that use whatever ilk or team surrounding them to do so. So it's really hard as a filmmaker to separate what's false and what's real. And that's our job as a documentary filmmaker.
You mentioned that you got a glimpse of some of this free energy technology or advanced weapon or advanced propulsion systems. Tell me a little bit more about that. What are we talking about? Did you see hardware? Did you see documents alluding to such hardware?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like you'll see in the film, we get a great device from Paul Murad, an engineer who used to work in the Department of Defense and, had a lot of connections. And when we ask a question point blank on camera, what do you know about these secret people? Are they already far ahead in this kind of stuff? Watch his face. He chuckles and he can't answer because he looks at the camera and he looks at the Dr. Ted Loader, as he's asking a question, and he knows he's playing coy, and you can tell as an audience member. So he says, I don't know what you're talking about, and just stops right there. And so his device, it was an amazing device. It had a 7% weight reduction in terms of it spun magnetically and had a certain amount of input or pulse. So that was the closest I saw to anti-gravity, and then new energy devices. We were given a lot of clips from other people to use. And like I said, making a film, especially given this situation with the way it was crowdfunded and the way that the financing came together and the distribution models and the marketing models, we were handcuffed at some points to go after certain leads that we did have, And I'll just say that's because of time and resources.
I believe it was Dr. Greer who told me once on this program that, people have paid the ultimate price in blood for attempting to disclose this free energy or a free energy system or an advanced propulsion system to the public. And I believe he mentioned a former head of the CIA who was found face down in the Potomac River as an example. I guess I would throw this question to you, Costa, as someone who is really dedicating his life attempting to reach out to these ET races that may be interacting with us, or you would say are definitely interacting with us here on Earth. How do you reconcile, I guess, the fact that they, being the elites who have this advanced technology and the rest of us don't, and they're willing to kill to prevent us from getting it, how is this being perceived by these ET races, knowing that people are dying as a result of this, and they can't get the technology to us, the public?
I'm sure that, and I can't speak for them about this, I haven't asked that question, but just from my educated guess, I would say that, of course, they're very concerned about this. They are concerned about how this small group of elite few are pulling the strings in many different areas, but obviously free energy is one of those very key areas. That's the $600 trillion business, rather the oil, fossil, nuclear game is a $600 trillion business that is threatened by free energy. So the extraterrestrials, of course, are concerned when they see human beings, being abused, murdered, bought off, and in so many other ways having their inventions sequestered or taken from them. I can only guess that it must be frustrating for them. They will not, from what I understand, intervene in the kind of ways maybe we wish that they would, to just show up on the White House lawn, for example. People always bring that up and just show themselves being here. I think there's a respect for human free will and the fact that we need to be able to solve our problems, to find our own truth and to act on it in order to grow, into a real worldwide civilization. So I don't think that they're here to solve all that for us, but they're here to help us where they can and where we give them permission to do so. Therefore, they probably have to watch in horror at some of this behavior. Now, having said that, there may be many, many times when they may have been given permission to intervene and to save lives of people who are doing good work in this area and in other areas that are in our common interest, ours being the human and ET interest. So people have said that they've seen ET craft following chemtrails, for example, and cleaning them up, or around the Fukushima reactor, trying to do work to alleviate the levels of radiation. The stories go on and on. The experiences go on and on in that vein where there is some help that's being given. So I can't say that the star civilizations out there, or here, rather, are being totally passive about it. It's not my call to know in what situation they would intervene and in what they wouldn't, because there's a far bigger picture than I certainly can see in terms of what's viable when. But I do have faith and some knowledge that where they can, they do protect us, they do work with us, and there may be many ways that we may never learn about how well we were protected. One of those, by the way, is the fact from many different sources, people talk about how starcraft have shown up around nuclear installations, and we're told that there are many times when nuclear wars have been prevented because they have been able to temporarily shut down weapons on both sides or one side or wherever the aggression was happening in order to avert World War III, which, as we all know, would be pretty darn catastrophic for the whole planet. That's probably an extreme example where they would have been allowed to intervene. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes they can help out these inventors, and to the point of your question, and sometimes perhaps they cannot. May the day come when we have full open contact and disclosure, and the powers that have been the controllers are no longer here, and then we can work openly with these civilizations because they have amazing technologies, and free energy, of course, is one of those great ones. A lot of your listeners might ask, well, free energy, that's nice. How do these ETs really affect my daily life? I got to go to work. I've got to pay my bills, got to educate my kids. I know they're kind of out there. I sort of believe, why does it matter to me and what can I do? I'm only one person. And at etletstalk.org, we answer that question by saying it has everything to do with you. When you form a community such as we have to make bilateral communication with these ETs, we're actually creating a positive future for ourselves. We're being active about it and not passive. If we were able to engage and bring these ET civilizations here on Earth out in the open, the free energy they have would power our homes. It would run our cars, our factories, our cities, our nations. People's work hours, work weeks would be reduced because we wouldn't have to just suddenly fight for all these basic survival things that could be provided by the free energy from the quantum vacuum of space. These ET civilizations have solved these problems. And it's not, like I say, just about the lights in the sky. It's about the lies on the ground. They've been covered up because bringing this free energy would liberate many nations. It would turn into the end of poverty, of hunger. Why fight wars over limited oil and fossil fuel resources when you have free energy? So you can see then that the good that could come to all of humanity from this open contact and cooperation with these civilizations is immeasurable. We could have, a new Earth, a golden age, and that's what we're striving for. At etletstalk.org, we're training people to go out into the field and to make this communication. And as one individual, maybe we don't count, but when there's thousands of us, like there are now, and we're growing every day, then we're going to make an impact. And the ETs will someday be able to walk the Earth with us and bring some of these technologies. And did I mention, medical technologies, other scientific marvels that we can only dream of that would be available to us. But first we have to be peaceful and solve some of our own problems in getting along.
Let me throw this over to the director, Arm Kalika. In the film, you're talking to government and military witnesses. Some of these people, I presume, know more than they let on camera. Did you get the sense from making this film that there is this chasm within government and the military? On one side, you have those who want to disclose. They think it's the right thing to do. It's the moral imperative. Then you have the others who don't want to disclose, but maybe for good reason. Maybe they feel that we're not prepared for such a paradigm shift. If you were to introduce, for example, free energy into a system that's reliant upon, the petrodollar, the economy, would go through a major cataclysmic shift. So let me throw that out to you, Arm. What is your sense of those who don't want to disclose? Do you think that maybe at some level they might even have a point?
I'll try to be short because, it is kind of a difficult one because in this community there is a lot of professing. And I, as a documentarian, like to ask questions just like you asked. But I think people should be asking themselves these same questions. And in terms of extraterrestrials or disclosure of this situation or free energy, I think you got to think of, you purposely don't bump into another human when you walk by them, right? You give them their personal space to grow or to walk or to move. And the same thing with civilizations this large. They know not to go take their ships and, just land on other people's soil and pass out, white blankets with, TB in them and wipe you out. It's just not ethically right. And if you're going to be this advanced over 1 million years, I do believe, you're going to have a high understanding of ethics.
All right, let me just jump in here. Sorry to interrupt, Arm. We're going to take a time out. When we come back, though, I'll get your sense on those in the military and the government that don't want to disclose. And I guess I'm asking whether you can see their point to a certain extent that we may not be ready for this. But we'll get to that when we come back. Arm Kalika and Costa Macris, two of the principals involved in the documentary film Sirius, here on The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Welcome back. Amardeep Kalika, Emmy-Award winning director, and Costa Macris, co-founder of VTLet'sTalk.org, my guests as we discuss the documentary film Sirius, which is, as I say, really 3 films in one. It's about the life of Dr. Stephen Greer, an emergency room doctor turned UFO researcher, and one of the principal driving forces behind the disclosure movement, along with people like Stephen Bassett, who organized the recent citizen hearing on UFO disclosure in Washington. But further, the film is also about the ongoing effort to disclose advanced propulsion systems. How are these UFOs getting to our neck of the woods? Also, free energy systems. And then we have this amazing humanoid-like creature of unknown classification found in the Atacama Desert in Chile. Now, before we get to the humanoid, let me throw this question out again, and Costa or Amardeep, you can both jump in on this if you'd like. I guess what I'm asking you is, we tend to, I think, look at this maybe in black and white. Those that are in favor of UFO disclosure are good, and those that are in favor of keeping a lid on this are bad. And I think there's probably a lot of gray area in there as well. And what I guess I'm getting at is it possible that some in the let's not disclose camp might have a point? For example, introducing free energy into our current economic system, which is totally reliant upon petroleum. Agriculture, pharmaceuticals, energy. The U.S. dollar basically is pegged to a barrel of oil. If all of a sudden that goes away, fossil fuel, it could have a cataclysmic consequence on our. Ultimately, perhaps when we come out the other side, it's good. But to get from here to there, we could have some really rough sledding. So I guess what I'm saying is, do you think it's possible that those that are against disclosure for that reason might have a point?
Absolutely. Thomas Jane, the voiceover of the film, a legitimate actor and a technologist, and he's a futurist in so many ways, point blank always says to me, disclosure is not a good idea. There's so many problems with that methodology and thought process, so there is a lot of middle gray. I'd liken it to evolution, though. Like, if we cannot survive a cataclysmic shift, or in terms of, let's not just say weather, let's say economies, all of a sudden we just start going into rage over the economical shift. Or we can't survive the idea that there is a whole another civilization not so far from us. All those things right there give us the weakness that allow people to say we cannot let this out in the open. And so they fight for it. They stop it. People are sitting on boards and having the same thing tanked over and over, and they go, people can't handle it yet. So our idea is pretty much we got to get the civilization to the point where it can handle it. And how do you do that? It's evolution. It's Charles Darwinian. We need to change far quicker than the truth that's going to be hitting us and smacking us in the face quite soon. And everybody sees the writing on the wall. There's going to be an economic shift. A, because we're becoming a type 1 society very fast, as Michio Kaku would say. B, because we're doing extremely caveman-like things, and we're just hitting the point where we're able to use our spirit and mind together. That is going to, if people can't survive that, if people, like for example, this former white extremist runs into our temple and shoots 5 people and then shoots himself. If he can't survive the idea that America's going to change and there's going to be people with turbans and beards, at a bowling alley, that is what's setting people off. That's what's creating the idea that we won't be ready. So as Costa would say, or as Steve would say, or as a number of people would say, the problem really isn't out there as much the problem is here. So we believe extraterrestrials are just keeping their space. They kind of can sense this. There's also secret society members that sense this, and I do believe a number of people in the secret society are part extraterrestrial. And there's a number of star child theories that we can go into, and a number of things I witnessed on this film that I could absolutely avow that certain people have some sort of DNA shifting because they're becoming star child or they're being connected to these extraterrestrial UFOs or lights in the sky or whatever it is.
All right, let me take a time out, come back, and I want to get into this DNA-sequenced humanoid creature discovered in a desert in Chile, which also features very prominently in the film Sirius. Armadeep Kalika and Costa Macris here on The Conspiracy Show discussing Sirius.
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
All right, let's get right to a discussion on this DNA-sequenced humanoid creature featured in the film Sirius. Armadeep Kalika is with us, Costa Macris, co-founder of ETLet'sTalk.org. Arm Kalika is the director. Give us the backstory. Where was this creature found, when, and under what circumstances?
Okay, it was found about 12 years ago. There's a little bit of shift of time in terms of our research and what people say. It was used in the Chilean desert. It was found in Chile, South America. It petrified in some way in terms of the dryness, the area that it was in, and that is connected to the science that we're seeing, the evidence that we're seeing. So it's also, this little being was then used in a kind of like a sideshow, like a freak. Like people would pay $5 to go see this little alien being. But that's what the guy kept saying, because there's stories in that area of sky beings and lights in the sky and little beings dropping to the ground, all these amazing stories. So a Spaniard comes in, and this is a dozen years ago or 14 years ago, and this is where this kind of gets a little blurry. He comes in a couple times and keeps seeing the being, keeps being affected. And then he goes one time, I want to buy that from you, and he pays a handsome fee. And he takes it back to Spain to a little institute in Spain. So it's sitting there right now. It's an institute that we have connections to. We did post who they are in the film. You can check it out. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. And we asked them, could we come film there? Could we also, while we're filming, take 2 snippets of matter, the bones, the ribs, the bone marrow, brain tissue, stuff like that? And they said, yeah, you can, but you have to pay a certain amount of money. And at that point, we had crowdfunded the film, but we didn't have a lot of extra money to go pay for something like this. So this was out of the blue. Because we didn't assume that they would say yes to something like that. We thought that would be so they gave us a number. We crowdfunded it. We go over there. This thing, I was not able to go over there as a director because what happened on August 5th affected our whole schedule. And like the weeks after, and I couldn't, technically, I had to send my second crew, and Dr. Emery Smith is the person that actually went there and filmed and was able to grasp and hold the being and move it around. And he's got a science background. He worked for the military, medical background. And so they go over there, they snip the bone. We take the bone marrow at Stanford. One of the top geneticists there, Dr. Gary Nolan. And he's one of the top stem cell guys. I mean, he's one of those top DNA guys in the whole world. He's always traveling. When we talk, it's all over the place, Moscow, Japan, wherever. So Dr. Gary Nolan decides to take this on as like a pet project. And little do I know, like he found out about this through the crowdfunding, and he really liked the videos, and he was wondering what was going on with this stuff. We connected to him that way, and then we told him there's this little bone marrow that we need to bring to you. So he studies it, examines it, does the mapping of the genome on it. He's still mapping to this day, but he's found some really odd results. From the CT scan, the MRI, the pictures, you'll see that the being actually only has 10 ribs. He found that out because he referenced all of his charts and maps and graphs to another doctor, Dr. Lockman, who's also at UCLA and Stanford. And Dr. Lockman notices these oddities, creates a full medical report, which we published, and then Dr. Gary Nolan continues testing. And he finds other things. For example, the gene that affects progeria, the quick aging disease, most people call it, and the gene that affects infant dwarfism, which somebody could argue that this was a dwarf in the 22-week of size gestation. None of those were affected. They were normal. There was no mutation. And those are things that would be. So then he checked the next 30 or 40 factors, and nothing was abnormal. So then we have a problem here. There's a phenotype-genotype difference. The being looks different than its DNA according to our map. So A, our map doesn't map this person's map. Okay. Then B, there's about 10% difference in the DNA all in all, like junk DNA and all the other things that people are finding are not so much junk. They're actually some sort of marker or a telltale sign of that being. And so he in the film tells you he's perplexed. He is a scientist. He wants to know this thing. He thinks the DNA is going to tell him what it is, and at the end he can't say yes or no. I don't know what it is.
Well, they were able to extract, I'm guessing, then mitochondrial DNA, which would indicate the mother, the
it's called B2, the haplotype B2. So the female side of this being and the DNA comes from Chile or that region. That region has had that haplotype for quite a bit now, thousands of years.
So this is a hybrid. This is a hybrid then. We're saying it has a human mother. And what about the nuclear? The way you think. And the nuclear DNA. What is that?
I like the way you think.
What does that tell us?
Because think about it like this: if you and I are going to clone Dolly the sheep, right? I'm going to take male sampling and female sampling of some certain cells. I'm going to put them in an egg and put it in a new cell, and that new cell is going to start replicating itself. Well, the new cell in our land are females. They're the ones with the egg. So if something can fertilize that egg somehow, some way, it can affect change in the DNA down the line. And so we had this little being that was born died 100 years ago, and now everything is showing that the being is actually 6 years old. Dr. Gary Nolan's jaw dropped because all this stuff of like bone calcification and the way they're measuring it and everything, all the results coming back, it's 6 years old. And he's wondering, how can a 6-year-old only be 6 inches large and have all of these amazing features, these oblong eyes, these 10 ribs, a jaw that's really, nutrition, or a jaw that's, just weaker than a normal human jaw. And what would this mean to everybody? And, I mean, I kid you not, after the film was done, not many people have even batted an eye. It's been sad. There's so many amazing results, and people don't even look at that as like a bona fide found specimen of something amazing in the universe.
Many parallels here with Lloyd Pye, the caretaker of the Star Child skull, who had a heck of a time getting a lab to do the genetic testing on this, because you can imagine the political fallout, for a company that specializes in genetic testing. You're doing what? You're performing tests on an alien-human hybrid?
Well, in this case, Dr. Gary Nolan was actually the person that debunked the star-child skull, and he showed it with the DNA, and he showed it with something. It was like a genetic mutation that we do see in humans. And then you found multiple cells that had it, and DNA actually pointed right there. The thing is human. It has the same. How could it have the same exact 1 million zeros and ones?
But in this case, he's saying that this humanoid creature, is not a malformed a human child. This is definitely sort of human female mother, but father origin unknown. Is that the conclusion?
Right, as of right now, yeah. And I think to answer your question, I'm an objective filmmaker. I understand this thing from the science and the inside out and the integrity with which everybody worked with. And I wholeheartedly believe this is something that's interesting on our planet and could be a half human, half extraterrestrial being. Some sort of DNA was hatched here in this way.
Let me get Costa's reaction. Costa McCrease, your thoughts on this humanoid creature?
Well, I don't have any more specialized knowledge than what Arm has been talking about. So like so many other people, I'm following the research into this being and the dynamic changes that are coming as Dr. Nolan continues to do research. And he actually stated in the film, this is not the end of the story. After the film ends, I welcome other people to continue their research and bring new information so that we all can come to some kind of a conclusion. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm sitting here and watching those same developments like you are, and hoping that somewhere down the line that there's an answer there. Now, whether this one winds up being partly of ET origin or not, still, what position I take and what my groups take is that we know there are other civilizations here anyway now, and if you watch a lot of Ancient Aliens, there's a lot of archaeological and other types of evidence that shows they've been here in our history in many places for thousands of years. So this particular being is of interest because it's in the limelight right now, but it's by no means the only kind of evidence that we have on Earth that we have been visited and are still being visited.
Well, that's exactly right.
That's kind of what our position is.
I'm so cynical at this point that, if, for example, they were to prove scientifically, categorically, that this was an alien-human hybrid and therefore, 100% proof that ETs have been contacting and intermingling with human civilization, that wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't get, it should be front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post, but it wouldn't be. It might get a quick blurb on the Drudge Report and then would be forgotten. So I guess my question to both of you in the few minutes that remain is, what's it going to take for disclosure to take place? I mean, maybe for the public it's already here, but to get official acknowledgement that ETs are coming to this planet, what's it going to take?
When the people lead, the leaders will follow. The whole part and parcel of our movement at etletstalk.org is to create, and we are creating, a citizens movement to do what governments have not done because they can't or they won't. That's disclosure. By sending teams out in the field by the hundreds and the thousands every month, we are allowing people to have their own experiences. So they don't have to rely on authority to tell them what's true and what's not. When you've had an experience in the field of seeing a light in the sky that just does not behave like anything known, and this happens to scores and hundreds and thousands of people, then we will be building up our own knowledge base, and we won't need an authority, and we don't need an authority right now because of the fact that we're having our direct experiences with CE5 protocols. We don't need that authority to tell us this is what you saw, this is what you didn't see, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, et cetera, et cetera. We are becoming our own experts, and in our social community at etletstalk.org, we're sharing the information of our experiences across the world every month, and so that we understand that ordinary people are having these experiences now. We don't need millions of dollars and specialized equipment. We use our techniques, the CE5 protocols, and we teach those on etletstalk.org, and we do the work ourselves. And that's what I think it's going to take. When thousands and millions of people have their own experiences, it's something that nobody can take away from them. Nobody can convince them that, that they're delusional or under mass hypnosis. They will know. They will have the authenticity of their experience. And when that happens in the millions, that's when more disclosure is going to come about. And the weight of public opinion will force governments to say, okay, you got us now. Here are all our files. Yeah, we were covering it up.
Costa,
I don't know when that will happen, but we're part of the movement that's making that happen right now.
Well, I hope you're right, Costa. Costa Macrease and Armadeep Kalika, two of the principals behind the film Sirius. Very quickly, gentlemen, because we've only got about 15 seconds, how can people see this film?
Online, theaters, DVDs are out. Go to sirius.neverendinglight.com or SiriusDisclosure.com, and you'll be able to watch it right online, and DVDs will be right there pre-sold, and then we'll be doing another theatrical release shortly. Hopefully, cross your fingers, guys. We're fighting a lot of fights over here.
All right. Thank you both, gentlemen. Back next week with a brand new show live from Greece. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the...
Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
I'm going to do my darndest to bring you an exemplary program. If it fails, it won't be my guest's fault because she always brings an A game. We're going to talk about chemtrails tonight. This is something I've talked about in the past. Actually, George reminded me. I did a program on chemtrails about 2 years ago. It's time we revisit, and I'll tell you why. I've been getting a lot of emails, and also, thanks to Twitter, people are sending me photographs, just stopping the car and looking up in the sky and taking with their cell phones, cameras, these incredible pictures of these strange patterns. We've all seen them by now. These strange crisscrossing patterns in the sky. These white contrails, one would normally think, jet exhaust, condensation trails, but strange patterns, like someone's playing a game of X's and O's in the heavens, and they don't dissipate quickly. They last for hours, and then sometimes they'll spread out, and then a couple hours later you look up and what was once this brilliant azure sky is now covered in this strange haze. Not those big Homer Simpson type clouds. You remember the opening credits on The Simpsons? Those a Homer Simpson sky. That's the kind of sky I remember as a child. You don't see that anymore, or rarely. What are those crisscrossing contrails all about? We're going to find out. It's called Geo-Engineering, folks. And you're going to learn tonight who's spraying them, and why, and perhaps most importantly, what we can all do about it. I'm about to welcome a journalist and author who's going to discuss precisely that. In fact, she came of political age during the COINTELPRO decade of Vietnam, street riots, political assassinations, and all-night rap sessions about the downfall of the establishment. Researching Sub Rosa America included discovering how deeply her U.S. Navy father was enmeshed with the very military-industrial complex she was writing about. And like the characters in the book, learning how every major event and personality in the United States political establishment over the past 40 years is tied in one way or another to the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. She has a BA in creative writing and wrote her master's thesis on historiography. Having written for progressive causes all her life, she also ghostwrites, and she also serves as editor of a very fine publication, Paranoia Magazine. A great delight to welcome Ilana Freeland to The Conspiracy Show. Hello, Ilana. How are you?
Hi, Richard. Good to hear from you.
Good to have you on the program. Let's start with a definition for those not familiar. Let's pretend that someone listening tonight has never heard of a chemtrail. What is your definition?
Well, I can characterize it, and many people look up in the sky and they see these long trails and they immediately think it's just more jets, either commercial jets, maybe military jets. But if a contrail, which is a moisture condensation, is not formed at a certain altitude, it is not really water condensation. And what we're seeing, these long-lasting contrails, persistent contrails, some call them, these are what the slang term chemtrails is indicating. And some people are calling them aerosols. Either way you look at it, it's not enough. You have to go into it in order to see who's laying these trails, what they're for, and what's in them that is slowly filtering down into our world on the surface.
Well, since jet travel became sort of de rigueur sometime, I guess, in the late 50s, with Pan Am and so forth, you would think if they were simply condensation trails, we would have noticed similar patterns, dating back 55 years. But really, people have only started to take notice of these since, the mid-90s? That's
right. Because even though they were doing some of this geoengineering, as you call it, or the other term would be stratospheric aerosols, they were laying them back in the 50s and 60s. A lot was going on during the Cold War, but they really stepped it up when the counterpart of the chemtrails was brought online, and I'm talking about HAARP, the high frequency active auroral research project up in Gakona, Alaska.
This is an array of radio. This is an array of radio antennas up in the Copper Valley, which is designed to do what?
Yes, and it was supposedly, when it came online in about 95, it actually came a little sooner, as do many military projects, than the public was informed of. It was dubious to people up in Gakona, Alaska, and one of those was a sharp naturopathic doctor named Nick Redfern. And Nick lived near it, and he is the first one who came out with a book on the project, and he called it Angels Don't Play This HAARP. That was published in 1995, and that was the very first thing I read in 1996. Before that, I had no idea. I was researching very different things than what was going on in the sky over my head.
So HAARP, and we'll get back to HAARP in a little bit later, but HAARP working in concert now with this aerosol chemtrail spraying campaign is what's really taking place today. But back to the contents of these chemtrails. And I traveled to Southern California a few years ago for the TV program, and I spoke to some researchers on the ground, and they were testing well water, they were testing soil, and the thing that jumped out at them, just the levels of aluminum oxide off the chart, Ilana. What
6,000 times what the norm was.
And is there any other plausible explanation for aluminum oxide getting into the soil? I mean, it does occur naturally in some degree, but not to explain 6,000% hikes in the content, I'm guessing.
No, nothing else explains it. I mean, if you live in an industrial area, you might make a case for aluminum oxide coming from some of the industrial pollution. But in most of these places, and Dane Wigington speaks very much about this in the work that he does and in Mike Murphy's film, Why in the World Are They Spraying? It's pretty much the entire case is built upon this spreading of aluminum, and then there are two other things coming down, and that would be the barium and the strontium. And so with the aluminum oxide, though, what you're looking at is a heavy metal. It's reflective, and it is ground down to nanoparticle size. I mean, tiny, tiny, tiny. And what the military used to call chaff during the Cold War, yes, this is in part what they're doing now. They're dropping chaff on us that is basically nanoparticle aluminum, barium, and strontium. And each one of those plays a different role for a different military purpose. I think we need to bring in, before we just go further into, and I do want to talk about barium for sure, does anyone remember something that came out back in the 90s, 1996? It was called New World Vistas, Air and Space Power for the 21st Century. It was put out by the U.S. Air Force Scientific Advisory Board, and it detailed 3 imminent revolutions in military. One was called, actually, Revolution in Military Affairs, RMA. It was about asymmetric warfare. It was about what is called full-spectrum dominance. And what full-spectrum dominance means is that everything in life should be weaponized so that it would increase superiority in the coming space age. And the other 2 were the geopolitical revolution of a single dominant global power, not seen since Rome. And that's straight from the document, not seen since Rome. And then the other 3rd part would be the information revolution, particularly a dissemination. So really what we're looking at now is a single dominant power since the Cold War ended in 1991. And I know a lot of people are confused as to how this technology, which I'm hoping to elucidate this hour, how this could be allowed in the world and how no one can really stop it or deter it. And it is because of this single power not since Rome that has been allowed. As you know, we're trillions of dollars in debt to supposedly the Chinese. They have all our bonds. Why are we allowed to continue? And why is our military allowed to dominate in the full spectrum in every way possible? And that is the question that led me to write this book is, yes, I am not a plasma physicist. On the other hand, there are so many expert scientists now who are either losing their lives, losing their jobs, or are in fear and saying nothing, that really the ball has been put in the court of the common people like me.
Ilana Freeland is with us. Ilana, we'll take a time out. We'll come back, and I want to drill down a little bit deeper into the nature of chemtrails before we get into the who and the why. We are speaking about geoengineering, aerosol, chemtrail spraying, and HAARP. Ilana Freeland on the line. Glad you're with us. Back with more in a moment.
Thank you.
The truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Ilana Freeland is here, editor of Paranoia Magazine, and she's currently working on a magnum opus dealing with aerosol chemtrail spraying and HAARP. But Ilana also emailed me earlier in the week with a horrible story out of Bakersfield, California, where no fewer than 9 police officers took their batons and literally beat a man to death who is apparently intoxicated, although that wouldn't excuse for a minute what transpired just moments later when police arrived, one of them with a canine unit, and basically sicked his German Shepherd on this man. The man was heard from across the street. People were awoken from their beds because of the sound of the batons cracking against this man's head. The man died, and police then started confiscating eyewitnesses' cell phones and going into their houses without warrants, demanding cell phones. Just a horrible, horrible story. And I contrast that with a picture of a police officer here in Toronto, one of Toronto's finest, who didn't know anyone was around. He actually was seen bending over and tying a homeless man's shoes, which just goes to show you. In the police forces around North America, we have angels and we have demons, and let's all pray that the angels outnumber the demons. Ilana Freeland is here talking chemtrail spraying. Ilana, let's just talk for a moment more about the aluminum oxide, because this is important. I remember speaking to someone who had been up to Mount Shasta. This is a pristine area of California. And again, the aluminum oxide in the soil was just off the charts. And an official was questioned about this, and they tried to explain it away by suggesting that the skis, of course, a lot of people do cross-country and downhill skiing in Mount Shasta. The skis were responsible. The shavings were coming off the skis. I mean, that is just beyond the pale ridiculous. But the other interesting thing is I've seen is the rates of Alzheimer's and dementia in and around Los Angeles County. I've seen the stats. It's at epidemic levels, and there is a relationship between aluminum oxide and Alzheimer's. I mean, what more do people need to know? There
is. You're right. And then another important facet of this is that the aluminum oxide is alkalinizing the soil to the point that, and it's a desiccant, so the vegetation is turning brown. Whole forests, says Dane Wigington, are turning brown and dying. And the aluminum, I mean, if you think about it, would they be spreading aluminum to do that? I mean, there are actually people who think that. In a way, it could be, because when organic farmers are driven out of their land because their soil no longer can produce the quality of vegetables that they could sell as organic, then they're strapped for cash, and in swoop the agribiz vultures to buy up the land for a song and turn it into another big giant agribiz. And in a way, that is true. People are being driven from their farms. This has been going on for a long time.
And no doubt
Monsanto oxide just adds a new facet.
And no doubt Monsanto or Dow has come up with a special seed that just thrives in highly alkalized soil.
Yes, it's aluminum resistant. And if that seems like a coincidence, I can say to your listeners, I no longer believe in coincidences.
Nor I.
That is definitely the plan.
And barium has been linked with high blood pressure and heart disease, has it not?
Yes. Again, that is not the reason that they're dumping barium on us. The barium is a fabulous conductor for communications. And this is really the most interesting part to me, because to my mind, the what in the world and why in the world are they spraying films, which are both free on the Internet, by the way, not to be missed. They go very deeply into the aluminum side, but the barium has to do with communications. And now we're in the land of military, and that's called, I think it's called C3I or C34 or C4 now. It is communications, and there are many, many facets to that communications. As you know, everyone's going wireless, and it's a wireless world. And for the military, which has its own frequencies, they want as many bands as possible for all of their, all the way from drones and, the UAVs up in the air spying on us, to things going on in real war theaters, such as in Syria or the Middle East. So the barium is very important for that. That we are suffering from the barium by breathing it in, and it's coming in through our skin because the skin is a respiratory organ. Oh, well, there's always collateral damage to the American military, and that's not something to really keep from doing something for.
One of the things
that's really going on.
Ilana, one of the things that we heard, and again, Michael Murphy brought this out in What on Earth Are They Spraying, that someone attended this Geo-Engineering conference that was taking place, I believe, down in San Diego a few years ago. And there the scientists were talking about this master plan, this last-ditch effort to thwart the effects of global warming. And that would be if they could suspend these aluminum oxide particulates in the atmosphere for long enough. It would cause the rays of the sun to reflect back up into the atmosphere, and this might, as it's kind of a Hail Mary pass, but it might forestall global warming. And even though they realize that pumping millions of tons, literally millions of tons of aluminum oxide would have a huge impact on the health of the population, they said one day we might have to do this. But some are theorizing that the scientists were basically telling us, well, we're telling you we might do it in the future, but we're really doing it right now. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think you're right. That's exactly what's going on. In fact, I comment on that in the book, that, everything's in the subjunctive, as if it were all in the future. It's being done now, and as far as the reflecting sunlight to prevent global warming, this is a real conundrum, and unless you go deeply into Bernard J. Eastland's patent for HAARP, you cannot understand what this, quote, global warming means, because what we're seeing now is extreme weather. And as you know, they're shifting from the term global warming to the more roomy, innocuous term of climate change. And this is because this cirrus cloud cover that we're all under, and if you're seeing azure blue skies up there in Canada, down here we're not seeing any of that anymore. We're seeing a pale blue, hazy sky almost every day. And this has to do with the spraying and the idea that the aluminum and barium would then, because they're both highly reflective, that they would be reflecting sunlight back. The truth is that the cirrus cloud cover is incubating us, and with the added the ionization going on because of HAARP and other ionospheric heaters in the world, we are actually in a sort of Faraday cage now and being baked. However, that global warming, this is the real global warming, the warming that HAARP is producing through these heavy metals in our air, and that is how it happens. These just get ignited because the electrons are moving so fast, it's all ionized. We're breathing ionized air now, and they can take that with HAARP, which has a steering and a mirror capability, and they can produce weather systems. They can bring snow. What was it recently? It was 3 feet of snow on our Memorial Day weekend, and in I can't remember where, Vermont, or was it in the Midwest? I mean, so many of these extreme weathers are being produced because of in my mind, and this is the case I make in the book, because of experimentation necessary to learn how to use this tool of weather manufacture for the sake of warfare, etc. And the story of geoengineering and ameliorating the global warming, that is a cover story beyond belief. And I can't even listen to David Keith or Ken Caldera. I can't listen to scientists who have been embedded in the military establishment lie to the people. Maybe they don't know they're lying. Maybe they believe what they've been told. But then where is their science then? Because it's obvious that global warming is being created by this, what I call a 1-2 punch of chemtrails and HAARP. That's how I see it.
Ilana Freeland is with us. We're discussing geoengineering, aerosol chemtrail spraying, and HAARP, and she is writing a major book about this very topic. When can we expect that to be published, Ilana?
I'm writing it for Feral House Press, and Adam Parfrey has assured me that it will be out in 2014, and my hope is spring 2014. Not
a moment too soon. You were mentioning the weaponization, and there was a defense white paper back, I guess, in the, I'm not sure when, maybe the late 80s, and they talked about, the name of the white paper was Owning the Weather by 2025.
That's right. Weather is a force multiplier. Mm-hmm.
Yes, apparently they're way ahead of schedule.
Way ahead, and they normally are.
So spell it out for us, Ilana, then. If the thwarting global warming by spraying these aluminum particulates is a mere cover story, and I agree with you, then what is the main objective? Is the depopulation or the causing chronic illnesses just an intended or unintended consequence? But what is the main goal here?
Well, I see several things, and if I were to just read the chapter titles, it'll be very evident. Okay, first, weather. The ability to control weather as a force multiplier. And again, remember that very, very important military policy of full-spectrum dominance. Full-spectrum dominance is why a lot of anthropologists and a lot of universities and many disparate subjects that you wouldn't think had anything to do with warfare have all been weaponized. And this is part of the revolution in military affairs. So weather control, number one. Then there's the weather derivatives. And again, why in the world goes into this very well. There is a Wall Street objective to make money off of weather futures. And there's an in-crowd that includes insurance people, calamity insurance people. It includes all the hedge funds and the slick guys on Wall Street, all vying for an inside track on what HAARP's plans are for the weather. Because some people, when I tell them that I believe that Katrina, Sandy, and this latest tornado in the Tornado Alley down in Oklahoma, these tornadoes, that these are all HAARP experimentation. Why would they do it to our own country, they say? Well, there's a variety of reasons. Along with the weather derivatives, you've got to think, how would this make money? And what I name in the book is Naomi Klein's excellent study of disaster capitalism. And that's what we have here. We have two things going on. One, we need, military says we need to experiment with this stuff, and we can't go to Canada and do it. We can't go to South America and do it. That'll create an international incident, so let's do it at home. At the same time, what can we do that we really want to change in our country? Well, it'd be nice to redo that port down in New Orleans. It'd be nice to redo the New York, New Jersey port, too, clean it up a little bit. So we'll move the weather systems in there and experiment, testing. They need lots and lots of tests to understand how to handle hurricanes, how to handle tornadoes. And, I haven't even gone to Fukushima at this point. I mean,
yeah. Let's take a time out.
I wrote that.
Hold on, Ilana. I got to jump in here. I apologize. I got to jump in. We'll take a time out.
That's okay.
And we'll come back. I'm just, my cynical brain racing here thinking, how else could they use this? Let's suppose some congressman down in Southern California is not voting the way they're supposed to on some appropriations bill, so you decide to bring horrible drought conditions to their region as punishment. Let's find out if that's possible. Ilana Freeland on geoengineering, aerosol chemtrail spraying, and HAARP right here on The Conspiracy Show. Don't you dare go away.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Just a spell back, I mentioned those devils with the Bakersfield Police Department who beat a man to death, father of 3 beautiful young girls. I've posted that story on my homepage at richardsyrett.com. I just wanted to draw your attention to that, and if you have a chance to visit the website, click on that story and read it. It's not pleasant, but sometimes we really have to confront the ugly truth with eyes wide open rather than avert our gaze. That's just part of being human. Right now, Ilana, excuse me, getting kind of choked up about that. And anyway, Ilana Freeland is with us as we're discussing geoengineering, aerosol chemtrail spraying, and HAARP. Ilana, one of the things that people, when they're emailing me, dozens and dozens every week now, and many of them with pictures of these strange chemtrail formations in the sky, and they'll say that they'll call the airport. They'll call the local newsroom at the TV station or the radio station or the city desk at the newspaper, and they'll say, what's going on? And they'll basically be answered with silence or ridicule. And the thing is, if this spraying is going on, somebody knows about it, obviously. But it's still at that level of, here you are on the conspiracy show, and people sometimes say when they come on this program, geez, I'm talking about an important issue, and I don't want it to get lumped in with all these other conspiracies. But this truly is a conspiracy. There's a conspiracy of silence going on, and people cannot get information from the people that are entrusted to safeguard our safety and our health. That's what's got me so riled up.
Yes, and I think it would help people if they could compare it with the Manhattan Project, which I believe it is Manhattan Project 2. This technology, electromagnetic technology, I call it in the title of the book, which is just a working title at this point, but it's called Chemtrails and HAARP, Persistent Contrails, Aerosols, and the Tesla Death Star. And this is how we will be remembered for this era. It will be the electromagnetic era, whereas the last one with Manhattan Project 1 was the nuclear era. And if people recall, most people are too young to recall, but it was highly secret. It was absolutely unspoken of. And scientists were silenced. They signed confidentiality agreements upon which the lives of them and their families depended. So we're there again, and the fact that there's so much silence in the airports, weather stations, etc., it isn't just ignorance. Now, it may be ignorance among the lower members, workers at these places, but among the high members, we have some. I think Will Thomas, in his book Chemtrails Confirmed, quoted a few guys from airports that said that, and who worked for airlines, that they had been forced to sign confidentiality agreements and not to speak of what they were going to spray out of their planes.
Do we know what kind of planes are these like military transport planes, like a Hercules? Some of them are C-130s, and some of them are regular commercial airliners that have canisters on them with special spray circuits. Usually in the what is it called, where people go to the bathroom and they hold that container. It's usually been converted, and then interestingly there appear to be drones, UAVs, unmanned, that are up there and look like commercial airliners, and then of course military flights occur at a different altitude from commercial airliners, so that has to be worked out. But always when they're picking up people on the various flights on the radar at the airports, they have been forewarned that certain of them are military. It's an experimental operation, and to just let it go. All right, let's grab a phone call here. People are anxious to talk to you, Ilana. Let's welcome Tara from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Tara, welcome to the Conspiracy Show.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just wanted to thank your guest very much for having the courage to expose this very serious issue. And I guess my question that comes to mind is, are you aware of any souls that are very courageous, as in, say, celebrities or Congress members that are speaking out about and exposing this issue to the public? Because it's just so depressing.
And you're in Canada, right?
Yes, yes. And it's just so
in your
depressing.
country I can't speak to, but certainly down here we have had several people who have attempted to speak out and have one way or another either been marginalized or silenced. Dennis Kucinich comes right to mind, and he was the first person to bring the Space Preservation Act of 2011.
Ilana,
2001.
I'm gonna jump in here, Ilana. We're gonna take another time out, and we'll get the rest of your answer after the break. Tara and Hamilton, hold on. Back with more of the Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
The top of the hour is nigh, so if you want to get in with a question or comment for Ilana Freeland as we talk about chemtrails, now is the time to do it. Tara and Hamilton called in wondering if there are any vocal supporters, high-profile vocal supporters in the United States. Ilana, you mentioned former Representative Dennis Kucinich, who spoke out, in fact, I believe, authored or co-authored this bill to prevent the weaponization of space. So continue along with that comment.
Yes, and that was in 2001. And here, in order to kill a bill, you put it in committee and then just let it evaporate there. And that's what happened. He brought it out 3 times, and the second time he had to eliminate all mention of chemtrails, and he had it in the first bill, and he had it under the same weaponry that goes under the title of covert weapons. So that was eliminated the second time. The third time it was eviscerated even more, and the fourth time even more, and finally it just sort of disappeared.
You know,
other than that, there is more action in Europe than there is here in the States. And I assume in Canada, or I think I would have heard. The Australians and New Zealanders are the most active of all that I know. I hear from them. I'm on one of their lists, and I get a lot of material from them. They are on fire, and they are doing protests in their cities, but nothing can stop it. This is the most interesting part.
Well, I'm sorry to hear you say that, because that was my next point. Is, you know, as we draw to a close here over the next 10 minutes, I was hoping that you could leave us with some good news. Okay, so let's assume that we can't, wrest control of these C-130 transport planes and stop the spraying. At least there must be something we can do to perhaps, boost our immunity and protect ourselves from the ill effects of the spraying.
Oh, definitely. And, I hope to include several ideas that have been given to me by people. For myself, I have my own plan. And what occurred to me as a sort of illuminating moment was that the animals that people eat and their dairy products, that these animals are breathing the same air I am, and that I would do well to minimize, 1, eating the animal, and 2, eating what they have discharged through their milk, their butter, their cheese, especially on heavily sprayed days. And a lot of people don't even look up to know when that is. And, of course, that would be the first thing I'd say is start looking up. Start figuring out the cloud configuration. And someone I would recommend on the Internet who puts up a lot of YouTubes was a weatherman. You probably remember his name, is Scott Stevens.
Yes, former weatherman in Pocatello.
One-time TV weatherman.
Yeah, out of Pocatello,
and he gives
Idaho.
a lot of ideas.
He's great
about looking at the clouds and how to read them.
Yeah, I mean, here's a guy, he was a former weatherman who basically had to quit in good conscience because he said, I couldn't, with a straight face, give the weather anymore. Once he figured out, he said, that it wasn't just some weather being manipulated, it was all of the weather being manipulated.
Yes, yes. And the other thing I would say, Richard, is that we must educate ourselves. We must, and to me, it's been so exciting to do the research. There aren't that many books. There was the HAARP book in '95 by Nick Begich. There was another book by Jerry Smith in '98. There was Rosalie Bertel's book in 2000, Planet Earth, The Latest Weapon of War. And then Jerry wrote another book, Weather Warfare, in 2006, before he died, and I have questions about that. So there's books, but mainly on the internet there are some amazing people doing incredible research. They're doing Dopplers, they're examining them, they're on it. They're looking at HAARP every day and went to HAARPstatus.com and what HAARP is doing. Is it fired up? They're examining various storms. This is a real democratic movement, and I'm excited by it, even if I live in the country that has a military that can't be stopped. I feel nothing but hope that an error will be made and that the people will be ready because we will be educated to know what to do because we have studied this technology. We must learn about this technology.
Well, hopefully there are a few patriotic flag officers who know what's going on, disagree with what's going on. There must be, and who are willing to, I don't know, at some point step in and put a stop to this. Or am I being naive?
Well, they're putting their lives on the line. I mean, so many, as you will remember back in the 90s and the early 2000s, so many microbiologists and various geneticists had very strange deaths.
Yeah, they turned face down, found face down in the Potomac River, I guess.
So many. Oh, I mean, I have a list of 24, and I'm sure that's not all of them. So I can't expect the experts to come forward. We have to do it. We have to study. We have to learn to think. We have to talk to each other and correct each other. Like when I'm putting this book out, I'm sure I'm going to make some errors, and I expect people to correct me. You know, we have to do this as a democratic action because we are under force. Whether we can see it, whether there's soldiers in the street or not, we are under force now, and I certainly am in the United States.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. So once you basically send all these particulates into the atmosphere, aluminum, barium, strontium, then you fire up HAARP, which is superheating the ionosphere with these ions, I guess.
Well, what you're doing is you're activating the plasma up in the ionosphere, and plasma is the fourth state of matter. A lot of people say it's a gas. No, it's not exactly a gas. It actually has a gas, a substance, fluid nature.
Right.
And that, once it's activated, then they pop out a bubble in the ionosphere, which is scary enough. And then that's a vacuum. It sucks up our atmosphere into the plasma ionosphere, and then that is then circulated back down and brought here to interact chemically with the heavy metals being laid by the chemtrails.
Right.
So that any part can be activated. I mean, you're right. They're doing this over every NATO country. I know that.
I'm just wondering how precise it is.
China and Russia, I don't know.
I'm just wondering how precise a weapon is it. Like, for example, I've heard things like that they can move the jet stream around now with HAARP. But
yes,
could they?
Definitely.
Could they, for example, during the Iraq War, the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, there were stories of entire, brigades from Iraq's army, basically throwing down their weapons. They were out of their minds. They were so confused and disoriented. And it was suggested that this was being done with HAARP. Can HAARP be used for mind control?
Yes, and I hadn't gotten that far in my list. That is definitely one of the large parts of this. And you're asking how it can focus. It focuses by mirrors, and by all the towers, the Gwen towers, the cell towers, the NextRads. We even have a mobile tower called an SBX-1 that was parked off of Florida just before the hurricane happened in Haiti. So we have a web of towers, of transmitters and receivers waiting for HAARP to ionize all these metal particulates that are in our atmosphere, activate them, ionize them, and then the HAARP steering mechanism with mirrors on HAARP and on the satellites beginning to reflect those in the direction they want to push it. And that includes the jet stream. I mean, it's an amazing weapon. What can I say? This puts radiation in the shade. And it can only end badly, as you and I know. But meanwhile, we must learn about what we're breathing, what we're living around, and I haven't mentioned the diseases that are being piggybacked on all these nanoparticulates being activated in our environment. Morgellons is one of them, and people have heard that term. There are many diseases being that will be piggybacked.
Right. Yes.
On these particulates.
I've been meaning to do a show for some time on Morgellons. That's one of those strange ailments that not even doctors are willing to diagnose.
Exactly. And when you see the Morgellons, which I have because I'm very good friends with Clifford Carnicom, who is probably most expert of all, and you can see his materials at carnicominstitute.com. He has many papers and many photographs. Morgellons is nanoparticles, nanofibers that are coupling with the iron in our blood. And my guess is we all have breathed in the fibers, but obviously not all of us have the fibers crawling out of our skin and under our skin. There's some other element which I believe, and I cannot prove it, but I'm going to argue for it in the book, that because some of these nanofibers have microprocessors in them, if you can imagine. They're already tiny, 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 and then they have microprocessors, that these can be activated remotely. And boom, suddenly you've got fibers crawling out of your skin. I mean, this is all sort of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde terror of experimentation, but it isn't like we haven't had it before. Non-consensual experimentation on American citizens is sort of de rigueur. This is how they've done it since I was born.
Well, yeah, I mean, back in the, I guess the 30s, we had the Tuskegee Airmen syphilis experiments, but now it's like, writ large, all of us now are in the Petri dish. All of us are being poked and prodded and experimented upon without our consent. We are living literally in a prison planet, Ilana.
We are, and I wanted to say that for the sake of the country that my immigrant grandmother taught me to love, that America is the hand on this weapon, but the brains behind this hand, that's something different. And I would look to the Bilderbergers, I would look to Council of Foreign Relations, I would look to the major central banks, I would look to IMF, World Bank. So, in other words, this is globalization. This is what it is. We all thought it was going to be, it takes a village to raise a child. No, this is what globalization always was in the minds of those who planned it.
Herd us into the cities where we can be controlled and experimented upon and kept. It's not about necessarily depopulation so much as keeping us all sort of at a level of a chronic illness where we're dependent upon. Yes,
because big pharma, and the big medical industry, they need dollars. I mean, everything is a business model under capitalism. And the other thing I wanted to say when I was telling you about the derivatives, remember, disaster creates lots of jobs, and this is how they're going to boost the economy after they scrape the cream off of it.
Lovely. All right, Ilana, a real pleasure having you on the program. We'll bring you back on. You are just a treasure trove of information, and I appreciate you taking the time tonight. Ilana Freeland, thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
All right. Please visit the website, richardsyrett.com.